I'm Mike.
And I'm Adam.
And this is Stuff and Waffle. Two friends talking about stuff, and often as not, waffling with frequent reference to Bond cars.
Right. Stuff and Waffle would like to welcome our first guest. You've heard his name and his cars mentioned. Now you can hear from the man himself as we say hello to our good friend Phil.
Oh, thank you for having me.
That's all right, mate. Yes,
Hello, Phil.
How are things, mate?
Not too bad, thank you.
Very good,
Yeah,
very good.
can't complain.
Splendid. Well, mate, one of the main reasons of getting you on is because, well, you enjoy cars as much as the rest of us, but your car history is tremendous.
It's got a bit out of hand in the past, yes.
Wide and varied, I think, is the phrase.
Yes. Well, yes, up to a point, yes.
Well, but I think we should regale the listeners with your automotive treats, to be honest.
Fair enough.
I don't know if you want to do it in any particular order, whether you want to tell them about everything or just pick highlights.
Well, there's a lot of dull stuff. I mean, it goes through the usual first car business, and then there came a point when I realised that cheap cars were quite good fun, and that's where the problem really started. Which is an era you're personally quite familiar with, I think, Adam, and Mike to some extent. And I mean, compared to some people, it's probably not that exciting. But I think where the conversation came about was a couple of weeks ago, was writing down how many I'd had, and it was a bit alarming how many I'd got through.
It's probably fine.
In what must be just shy of 20 years now. Yeah, it's about 20 years. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's, as I say, I'm sure some people would think it's amateur hour, but I'm quite impressed, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you're going to struggle to have people to beat you in terms of numbers.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, some of them have been quite short term, yeah, because the first few are quite dull. Because I mean, the first car, which again I know Adam will recall, is a little Citroen AX.
Oh, wasn't it a lovely thing occasionally when it worked?
No, it wasn't. No, it was. I remember. This is the era when I knew nothing about cars. I was
Clearly.
interested in cars, but I knew nothing about them, and I'd spent so long trying to find the first car. The usual thing that every 17, 18-year-old deals with is trying to find one that you can insure and afford to buy. And
it's quite a short list, isn't it?
Yeah. And I remember my parents were always quite sort of what's the word? They weren't very adventurous with cars. So they go with they generally was always buy from a dealer, second hand. They rarely had new cars apart from company cars, but it was sort of always buy from a dealer and stick with the your Fords, your Vauxhalls and Rovers and British cars. And so when it came time to buy, we were looking at mostly Fiestas and Corsas and things. I was encouraged you should buy from a dealer. Or a garage at least, because you get a warranty and all that. And
God.
And in the end, so many false starts and finding cars that were great, but the insurance was ludicrous. And I ended up with this. I think my dad more or less went and bought it on my behalf just to stop the hassle. Yet another weekend of going and looking at down cars, and this was one that a local dealer could not get rid of. It had been sat on their forecourt for weeks, and in the end, they chopped, without him even asking, they knocked about £300-400 off the price. So it was about 700 quid.
Just take it away.
And I soon found out why. A little 1 litre. Should have been quite a good, fun little car, but it was a mobile ashtray. I mean, someone had spent a lot of years smoking in that car with the windows shut and the vents turned off.
Oh, closed window smoking. That's hardcore.
Get your money's worth out of your cigarettes.
Exactly. The first time I turned the vents on with the fan on full blast, I had to go and get a nicotine patch. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it was
withdrawal
nasty.
symptoms after driving it.
Yes, and then unfortunately they spent so much on cigarettes they had nothing left to spend on maintenance. So I spent the next 3 years basically. It was at the because again I knew nothing about cars and fixing cars, so it ended up going to the garage a lot. I mean, it was a fun little car, but yeah, I wouldn't have another one. But it got me through college and university, and my sister learned to drive in it in the end. So, but yeah, pretty much everything mechanical broke on it at some point. The brakes never worked properly.
Mm.
In fact, one exciting time when I gave some people a lift in it one night, there was 4 of us in it on a rainy, wet night, and I pulled up alongside the pavement to drop them off, and it would not stop. It just carried on.
Jump!
Yes, and yeah, no, I don't really miss that one. And then it was just mediocrity after that. Fiestas and a Focus and Honda CRV for a while I was adventurous.
Well,
That was a good car. I loved that CRV. That was one of the Mark 1 ones, the early ones.
Apart from the fuel bill.
It was quite thirsty for someone who was used to little economy boxes, but it was such a useful car. And a bit of Honda, it was an unusual experience for me because it never needed anything and it always worked.
It wouldn't break. Yes.
No, it never put a foot wrong, but it didn't half drink. And then because I got fed up with the fuel economy, I thought if I bought again, if I go back and have a word with myself, I thought, this is costing such a lot to run because I'm doing quite a lot of miles. I need something that shape and size is really handy, but more economical. So I traded it in for a Peugeot 307 diesel estate.
Good God.
My word. What a decision.
Yes, I had that car for 6 months and I lost $2,500 on it. Not including the repair bills in that period, probably nearer $3,000. And the car cost $4,000, I think. So 4.5, which is more than I'd ever spent on a car. Because it was quite new, but it just broke constantly. I've never hated a car so much.
What a tit.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I've heard you regale us with stories about that before, and just think, ordinarily I'd ask you, what was the worst car you ever had? It was that. I know.
Yes,
I don't need
to.
I don't need to quiz you on that at all.
There's some that have come close since then, but that just for being utterly hateful in every way. The dealer, I bought a Astra Coupe in a lovely metallic orange. I traded the Peugeot in broken for that Astra, and that was an excellent decision because that was actually a lovely car.
I remember that metallic orange.
It was a really well. They did two. They did a yellowy one, which was quite common, and then this sort of darker, sort of burnt orange, which I seldom ever saw another one. But it was a lovely colour, and it was quite.
I do remember it.
It
was nice. Yeah, it was nice. Yeah.
Well, and that particularly the coupe as well, styled by Bertoni. Very nice.
Oh well, there you are. You had arrived.
It was a pretty car. The dealer that sold it to me spent £1,000 mending that Peugeot because the Astra went back for a little job with him. He offered to take. When I picked it up, it had a little issue, and he offered to fix it for me. And I took it back to him a few weeks later, and he sorted it. And he said, I really regret buying that Peugeot off you. He spent £1,000 mending it to clear the DPF faults and all the rest it had. The new owner brought it back a week later with the same faults had come back.
Oh, good.
That was money well spent then, wasn't it?
Yeah. So that Astra was cool, but it was totally impractical, and I just started my own business. So I thought I need something practical. And for the first time ever, I went on eBay with a low budget and went looking for a van. And I bought it would have been a very early Renault Kangoo, little 1.9 diesel, and it was quite cheap. And the guy said that it needed a couple of tires, but it was all right. It ran and drove all right, had MOT, etc. And he turned, and it was like quite a smart sort of dark bluey green color. so it wasn't a generic white van. I
Not
thought
just a white van.
I thought I'll give that a clean up, and that will look good with the business. What he hadn't mentioned, he was kind enough to deliver it because he wasn't very far away. What he hadn't mentioned was that he ran a small holding, and he'd been using it to transport farm animals.
And you wanted it to transport people's brand new computers.
Yeah. Oh,
dear.
God. It's the first car ever where I've dismantled the interior and ripped the flooring out on the driveway and jet washed it. And the interior, not a word of a lie, the interior floor, seat, dashboard were brown. They were actually blue.
But not when you got it.
No, it smelt horrific inside.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was to be honest. I spent a lot of time cleaning it, and it actually scrubbed out really well, and it did look quite smart for a while. But it turned out to be quite rusty underneath.
I can just imagine you delivering some kit to some of your clients, and they say, "Why does our server room smell of sheep?"
I think it's pigs actually.
Even better.
Even
better.
It was. Well, I did scrub the living daylights out of it, and it ended up being quite respectable. It was all right after a while, but
it came back.
that was the first vehicle I think that I took to a mechanic I'd known for a while but hadn't ever used, and he put it through its MOT, and he'd said to me, "Oh, it needs a little bit of welding underneath, nothing too major." And he rang me up 2 hours later and said, "I can't find anything to weld to." Every time he poked it, he found
nothing left.
Yes, that was the one where when I sold it on, my accountant went through my business accounts for the first year, and he when he was going through them, he'd been through them and gave it back to me. He said, "That van wasn't a very good idea, was it?" So rude.
Thanks for that.
But
rude. You can do one.
I'm paying you to shut up and do the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need opinions, thank you.
Yes, I sold it for. Yeah, actually, to be honest, I didn't do too bad on it because I think I sold it for what I paid for. I had to spend quite a bit mending it, but mechanically it was fine. I really liked the van. It was
better than the Peugeot.
Yeah, it was a great little van actually. I'd have another one, but that one had just unfortunately, yeah.
We've had a fine selection of choices to this point.
You say you'd have another one and that you quite liked it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Gordon Murray say that he really rather liked a Renault Kangoo? And
I don't know.
Might have even had one.
Well, full respect to the man. He's got excellent taste.
He liked it in terms of packaging, as I recall. It had really, considering the footprint of it, it had really excellent load capacity, and that scratched his itch.
It was comfortable, it was reliable, it went well, and it ran on fumes as far as I could tell. Oh no, I do remember one thing with it, because I always thought the seat wasn't really adjusted. It went back and forth, but you couldn't adjust the height or anything. And I always thought, yes, we've got a weird seating position, this thing. It's like you sit really low down in it. And I thought, I'm just average height. And I thought, I feel like there's tons of headroom. I feel like I'm barely see over the dashboard. When I investigated further, it turned out that the seat had collapsed and literally had fallen. This foam had fallen through the seat frame.
You were sagging.
Sitting on the floor.
I was probably sitting 6 inches low. Yeah, so I had to bolster that up a bit. Yeah, it was. But then I replaced the car and the Astra Coupe that I couldn't get anything in, and that with a brand new Kia Ceed. It's the only brand new car I've ever bought, which you mentioned before, Adam.
I remember that car. Yeah.
Well, I had my way with it, didn't I?
You did. That was the one that, as you said, it was a fine car for what it was. I got a very cheap sort of deal on it because the local dealer, I think they were just about to bring a new one out, and it was a little 1.4, and it was perfect for what I needed because it was reliable, it was cheap to run, and it looked smart for the business, and you could get stuff in it. But honestly, that car was cursed. I had it 2.5 years. People drove into it. I used to walk dogs to the Dog's Trust, and a dog yacked up in the back of it before anyone had even sat in the back of it.
That's nasty.
Yeah, the staff thought it was hilarious. I wasn't so sure.
I'm on their side, to be honest.
Yeah.
I parked it up in the garage, and the paint tin fell off a shelf and landed on the bonnet. Adam soiled it post go-karting.
Yeah, I didn't. No effluence went on it. It was just moisture.
Well, it looked like it.
Hang on.
But yeah.
No effluence. It was just moisture. That's a very fine line you're walking there.
No, it was moisture from the sky, which my jeans had soaked up.
Okay.
But so it left a really horrifying stain on the seat that took a long time to go away. But yeah, so I was quite glad.
Rainwater does that.
I'd be curious to know if whoever's got it now still has the curse.
I think yes.
Whether animals run out in front of it and it gets crashed into in car parks and whatever, because it was cursed.
It's still going strong, isn't it?
I guess. I think I looked it up online a while back when we were talking about it. Yeah, I think so, because it's not that old. It's only like a 2012 or something.
Yeah, it should still be alive, shouldn't it?
It was a good little car, but it was extremely boring.
Non-event, that one.
Yeah.
And then I was on a forum where a chap was selling a Rover 220, and he was having trouble getting rid of it. And I'd never really thought about having an old. I'd had a little Nova to play with for a while and kind of learn stuff on, but I never really drove it or did anything with it because I didn't like it very much. He was selling it for 150 quid, and I thought I'd seen it before on the forum because the previous owner had done a ton of work to it. It looked tatty, but it was supposed to be a very good engine because it had an engine swap for a younger engine that hadn't done so many miles, and the 2-litre T-Series was actually quite a good engine in those cars. But this one was proper granddad spec, and it was 150 quid. And it was like, it's only got a couple of months left to live. It's got a massive crack in the windscreen. It needs work for its MOT. And I thought that would be fun to have a play with. I always quite like those. So I bought it, drove it home. It was a long way away. I'd take a coach trip to go and get it, which was all part of the fun. Or train journey or whatever. It's like have a day out, pick up a cool old car. And I remember sitting in a traffic jam in this battered old Rover, thinking this car cost me 150 quid and it's running, driving, MOT, tax insured and all the rest of it. And I was sat next to some brand new Audi, and I thought, I feel quite smug at this point because I'm doing exactly the same thing as him for a week's payment on that one. And that's what I quite like about all that sort of thing, is reverse snobbery. But I kept that car going for ages. I put it through its MOT, I fixed it because I liked it so much. It was so comfortable. That was why I got rid of the Kia, because I thought I was using the Rover more because it had lovely soft seats. It went like stink. Yeah.
It was a good one.
It looked awful.
It did look a bit ropey, I'll give it that.
The bodywork was scruffy, and I took it to Pride of Longbridge one year when it had been parked up in the garage for a few weeks because I remember the tax had run out and I'd lost the V5. So it sat for weeks while I sorted that out. And the garage, because I live near the sea, it had gone quite rusty. And to deal with that, I rubbed down the rusty patches all over the doors and the wings and everything, and I with grey paint a rust primer just to put something on the rust to stave it off. And then I think a week or two later, someone said, "Oh, why don't you go to Pride of Longbridge, which is the Rover? Well, it's not just Rover, MG, Austin, Morris, get together, everything that came out of Cowley, Longbridge, etc.
Yes. Yeah,
all have a meet up in the field." And I thought, yeah, it'd be cool. I drove up and took it to that, and I think I was going for shame of Longbridge because it had. I was doing a lot of miles in it because my girlfriend lived a long way away at the time, and I was using that car, so doing a lot of miles in it. It wasn't really getting washed. One of the hubcaps had fallen off, and it had grey primer all over it. A previous owner had fitted a tow bar by chopping out a chunk of the rear bumper. So
nice.
It wasn't a looker.
It wasn't exactly factory fresh, is what you're saying.
No, and then I was directed to park it up in the field next to an immaculate one-lady owner job.
Well, there you go. You got the contrast, didn't you?
Exactly. That's what I
look
thought.
At what you could have won.
Well, exactly. And then I took quite a lot of pride in people sort of walking up to it and going, "Oh," and pointing out what was wrong with it.
Yes.
And I said I met a couple of people I knew out there, and I said to one, I said, I think I've actually got the shabbiest car in the show. I'm quite proud because I've walked around. And he said, no, sorry, he said, you got second place. He said, there's an Austin Princess down the bottom of the field with actual holes in it.
someone had beat you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, it's I mean, I had a couple of little motorbikes around that time, but then that got replaced with one that I know Adam will recall fondly, which was my turquoise Volvo 940.
oh, it's a good one, that was.
Oh, yeah, I'll give you that.
You
I
Yeah.
don't
paid
know if
way
you
too
ever
much
saw
for
that
that.
one, Mike.
I don't think I did, but a Volvo
No,
940, yeah,
it
that's a
was.
good choice.
It
Yeah.
was turquoise, and the owner had planned to charity banger rally it, and for whatever reason decided not to. But yeah, it turned out to have quite a lot of issues.
Okay.
But that said, it never. I don't think I ever took it to a garage for anything other than MOT. I just didn't mend it. It just kept
But
going.
it just
Of
kept going
total
anyway.
neglect.
Yeah.
It always leaked. The heater matrix in those is a bit of an issue, and that one always leaked. And so the interior was always a bit damp, but it had ferocious heated seats, velour heated seats.
Yeah, I thought there was going to be a fire when I drove it.
Yes. Oh, it was
Honestly.
brilliant though. I mean, it was so practical.
Yes, I do
yeah.
recall you paid more than you should have done for that.
Well, it wasn't expensive, but it wasn't. It was what, 750 quid. But at the time, you could pick them up for 300-400 quid, and that was a 300-400 quid car. But I suppose we're splitting hairs at that price range. But yeah,
Well,
it was rough.
I do
I mean,
recall being in the pub with you, egging you on to bid more.
oh, that's right. I'd forgotten about that.
Always
Yeah, because
supportive.
I think I'd set a limit of about 400, and the auction was ending, wasn't it, while we were in the pub?
Yeah.
Yes. And I'd said I'm out at about 450, and I ended up paying nearly £800 for it.
Just a little bit over.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of peer pressure is fine.
Yeah, that's hence double the budget. Yeah, there you go.
It was an all right car like that. I like that car, but it never it had been well used.
Tell
I mean,
the
I
nice
know.
people about when it
Yeah.
broke down.
Oh, what? When I was selling it? Yes, that was embarrassing. Yes, because it had never really gone wrong. It was a Volvo. It was a 2.3 low pressure turbo actually, so it went well, but it was pretty reliable. And I got to the point where, well, as I'll come on to, I had something else I wanted instead, and I put it up for sale. And a chap came down. They went over it with a fine tooth comb. Older chap, and his son was in his 20s. I can't remember who of them was actually having it, and they went over every last detail, and I'd explained the faults I knew about, and that was fine. And we took it on quite a long test drive, and then when we were coming back through town, it just turned off. It just cut out, and we coasted to a stop at the side of the road. And he just looked at me, and I kick myself for saying it now, but I came up with the classic car seller's phrase: "Oh, it's never done that before."
Never done that before. Yeah,
And it genuinely hadn't. And it once the traffic had cleared, it started up fine and drove, but yeah, I lost that sale. But the look he gave me was just, I felt so hard done by. It's like, no, I was being honest.
Yeah, it genuinely has never done this before.
Yeah, I don't know whether it did it again. I've no idea why it did it. But it was literally it wasn't a stall. It just off.
It just died just there and then. Yeah, weird.
While I had that, I was persuaded to rescue another car though. And
Persuaded.
yes. Well, again, they posted it on a forum I used, and it wasn't a car I particularly wanted, but as the days went on, the price dropped and nobody was interested. The MOT was out and it was just about to be scrapped. And it was the sort of, look, it's got to go. If nobody wants it, I can get £100 scrapping it. So, whatever. At the time, this was a few years back. And you like it, Mike. It was a 1.4 Mark IV Escort.
Classic. Very good.
Like, I think you've had a couple yourself, and yeah.
Yes,
And I thought,
indeed.
well, classic thing. My dad's had one of those, and I felt a bit nostalgic, and I felt sorry for it.
Yeah.
It had an
Get
interesting
that.
history because it had been used in a post office robbery. It had been stolen and used in a post
Oh,
office robbery,
okay.
which had left it with some issues. So, and it was, in fairness, it was only a 5.5 hour drive away.
Oh,
So I
just round
round the corner.
Well,
Yes.
exactly. So the issues I knew it had was the bonnet was jammed shut because the cable had either snapped or come off, so they
Right.
couldn't get the bonnet open. The battery was flat. When they'd broken into it to start it, they'd broken the indicators, so it had no indicators.
Okay.
It had been sat for several months, hence the battery going flat, and I think it had a couple of other issues. So I bought a second-hand indicator stalk unit and a battery, and I went up on the train. I bought the battery when I was nearer.
Didn't
But it was
carry it
near
up with you.
Brighton somewhere. Yeah. Oh, I think I stayed with a friend who lived much closer, and then I picked up a battery and went up there with the full. I don't know what I was thinking of driving it 5.5, 6 hours home, and
Right.
it was in his works car park out in the middle of nowhere. I think it must have been a Saturday or a Sunday. There was no one else around. He took me out to it. And I thought, well, obviously the first thing is we've got to get this bonnet open. And
Yeah.
we spent probably half an hour tinkering around with it, jacked it up, put it on axle stand so I could get underneath it. And I did think at one point, if anyone comes across us here, this is going to look really weird now because we'd spent so long on it. I was starting to think, oh God, this isn't going to work. I'm not being able to get into it. I was lying underneath it with my arm wedged up between the slam panel and the radiator, cutting myself to ribbons, trying to find the latch by feel alone, while he was jiggling the bonnet up and down, stood over me. And I remember at one point I found the latch and pulled on it, and the bonnet almost released because it all seized up as well because it hadn't been open for God knows how long.
Yeah.
And eventually the catch gave, and there's he is, stood over me with my legs sticking out from underneath the car while I'm under it. He's jostling the bonnet up and down and making grunting noises while I'm under the car going, yes, yes, yes.
Dirty.
And no, but fair play. I mean, we got the bonnet open, put the battery on it. I changed the indicators over so that they worked. Changed a couple of blown fuses. Swapped one of the rotten tires for one of the spare, which was slightly better.
Slightly less
And
rotten.
I booked an MOT for the next day to drive it home, and I tell you what, it drove perfectly the whole way home. Had no issues with it at all the whole drive home.
Wow.
And it went through its MOT. It needed a little bit of welding, but not rot as such. It was where it had been run up over a pavement,
Right.
which had
Okay.
damaged
Yeah.
the front suspension, and one of the suspension mounts was twisted or something. It wasn't anything major. So, yeah, but I I didn't like it. It was gutless, and it wasn't a very good engine. I don't think that 1.4 CVH, and it just
A little bit underpowered for the size of the car.
I never warmed to
Yeah.
it. No.
Yeah.
So I traded it with someone I knew for the Rover 220 that I'd previously sold.
Well, you
Back
you
it
bought the
comes.
same car back.
Yes.
Okay.
By which time the Escort had blown quite a big hole in its manifold, so he didn't live that far away, about half an hour, 45 minutes away. So I drove it down to him with it sounding like it had no exhaust on it at all.
Right.
He was happy. So yeah,
Oh,
so I
fair
had it
enough.
again. I had the Rover again for a while.
Very good.
I do
But-
recall as well that
Yes.
that Rover, there were those when you got it back the second time, it was another go-karting trip
Oh yes, I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
where to get to the go-karting, it's very much country lanes, and you were following me, and I decided that it was a good time to stop abruptly because there was a tractor coming.
Yeah, because we'd been going a fair pace,
Oh yeah, we were moving,
and
and
I had 4 people in the Rover, I think, didn't I? And
well, I had a full car too,
yeah, well, yes.
just better brakes. I I thought, oh, there's a gap, and I stamped on the brakes and went into the gap, and all I saw was fear in his eyes in the rearview mirror.
I'm surprised I didn't push the brake pedal right through the bulkhead.
Well, I can't stop that fast.
It had some momentum going. I mean, it didn't have bad brakes. It was just it didn't brake as well as a much newer Volvo estate. Yeah.
Yes. Oh dear.
Yes, there's valuable lesson learned about relative braking distances.
Mm.
I did stop, and nobody was harmed.
No, you were just very wide-eyed.
Possibly took a year or two off my life, but expectancy. But yes. But while I had that, this was a point at which I realised that one couldn't simply have one car. So I, at this point, had at least 2 or 3 on the go.
Oh yeah.
But I got tired of the Volvo, and I'd been looking for a while for something in this ilk. And then again, one day at work, I put a bid on eBay for something just before I left work, and accidentally won it, which was, I think, still one of the best cars I've ever had, which was a 1994 Jaguar XJ40 XJ Sovereign Saloon 4-litre.
It was a lovely, lovely thing.
It was enough years ago as well. This has got to be 4 or 5 years ago when they were still cheap.
Yeah.
And it was MOT'd, running and driving, and not rusty at all. And it was, what did I pay? 460 quid?
That sounds right, yeah.
That does sound right.
About that. But it was also an extremely rare colour combination, because it was, I think they called it sage metallic green, and it had oatmeal leather.
Yes.
No, jade green, and it had oatmeal and sage leather, because it had green and cream coloured leather.
Yep.
It was absolutely gorgeous, and it had the weird flat sort of aero alloys as well. Very 90s looking.
That's right. There were the smooth ones. I remember those.
I've seldom ever seen them on another one.
No, they're
I
quite
think
rare.
They get swapped out a lot because they're not the prettiest things in the world, but they're so 90s.
But they were original to the car, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was another one that was many hours away. So I went and stayed with my friend in that area of the country, and then used that as a staging post to finish the journey the next morning.
Yes.
Oh yeah, and I thought what I'll do is I'll stay with him, which is nice for a day or two, go and get the car, which is another hour and a half train journey or whatever, bring it back to his, stay another night, and then finish the 3-4 hour drive home in my lovely new Jag.
In your lovely Jag.
Yeah, so I got off the train, walked up to the guy, and it was I think it was his son that was listed. It was an elderly chap who was selling it. He obviously wasn't particularly well, and he was quite sad to get rid of it, but he wasn't using it. And he'd gone to look for me, because it turned out there were 2 stations in the town, and which I didn't realise. And he'd actually offered to pick me up, and he'd gone to the other station.
The other one, of course.
So by the time I walked up to his house, he just arrived back home. And the first thing I thought was, oh, it's got quite an exhaust blow. Like, it's
was he driving?
Proper fruity. Because he drove it to
come and collect you, right? Okay.
Which was okay. It definitely works. That's good.
Yes,
but I thought,
it goes.
It does sound quite fruity, and he'd obviously done. You look at the MOT history; it had done very few miles for several years. And we did the deal. We had a lovely chat and a cup of tea, and then I got in it and went and filled it up at the petrol station. And I started to drive. I think it was Hastings, and I started to drive out of town, and I thought, something not right here. I started to go down the hill, and I lifted off the accelerator, and it stopped. Thought, right, we've definitely got brake issues.
Okay.
Because it will hold itself on a hill.
Without you doing anything.
And I thought, that's all right, bit of use, they'll clean up, and it's probably just lack of use. So I gave them a good workout, which helped a bit. Good when there was no one else around behind me. Good stamp on the pedal a few times. It did seem to help a bit. But they were dragging, and I can't remember what else it was. He'd said that it had really good tyres on it. Yes, they've got loads of tread. They're also ancient. And they're of a brand I've never heard of called Hero.
Okay.
So it had on the back as well, on a rear-wheel drive car, 4-litre rear-wheel drive car.
Yeah.
that wasn't ideal because it didn't have much grip at all, and it obviously hadn't been serviced in some time and wasn't. It was running okay, but clearly not as good as it should. And I was a bit alarmed because I had at this point in total probably at least 5-hour drive home, good 400 miles, I think. I can't remember. And I noticed that the miles per gallon display was saying 11.
Well, you're doing well.
Double figures.
And then I drove a few more miles, and I thought the brakes are not getting better. In fact, they're getting worse, and you could hear them dragging, and you could feel when you pulled away at traffic lights that the sort of the back end sat down a bit, like you're holding it on the handbrake.
Did you have hot wheels?
They were getting warm, so I was quite relieved when it turned out that the alternator didn't work and it broke down 9 miles out of town. Yes.
A blessed relief there.
Yes.
You didn't have to drive it anymore.
Well, yes. I mean, it wasn't ideal because it was bitterly cold, and luckily it was kind to me. I noticed the voltage was falling, and I was passing through what looked like a brand new industrial estate. Literally brand new, like most people hadn't moved in. And the tarmac looked like it'd been laid the day before, and there was nobody around.
Okay.
So just as it started to run out of enough power to run the fuel injectors and whatever, and it started to conk out, I could pull in and call the breakdown, and it was perfectly safe. But my God, I nearly froze to death. It was so cold, and I hadn't
no way of
being
heating.
outside, no heating, and I don't think I even had a coat with me because I was thinking, well, I'll be back to Portsmouth in an hour and a half.
Oh, dear.
But yes, it got relayed home. I think I got home at 2 a.m. in the end, all the way back home. But on the other hand, it did not save me a lot of fuel.
I was going to say, a much more frequent trip. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I stuck a new alternator, a rebuilt alternator on it the next weekend, and it was back on the road. But the brakes were terrible on a car that big and powerful.
It's quite common. The one that Hubnut had, his XJ40 had binding brakes as well, if you remember.
Well, I took it to my mechanic because at the time I didn't have really I'd started to work on cars quite a bit, but I didn't have anywhere to really work on a car that size because it didn't fit on the drive. It had to live in the road. It didn't fit on my drive. So he had a look and he unseized the calipers. And it seemed all right for a while. And then I think, Adam, you were with me, actually. We took it for a run, and the brakes weren't binding anymore. And it wasn't still running quite right, but we took it for a run and on a windy B road, and then came to a sharp corner. So I braked quite firmly, and it went left.
That was it.
Violently left.
Oh, God.
And it turned out that one of the brake hoses had collapsed.
Of course.
Yeah, wheel braking. So yes,
that'll make for good stability.
It's a bit clenched.
Yes. So yes, that car got a full brake rebuild and a set of new tyres, and that transformed and a service. I knew I could tell it hadn't been serviced for a while when I pulled the ignition leads off and one of them snapped in half.
Yeah.
So yes, but after that, it was glorious.
Yeah, it was. Once it's cleared its throat as well.
Yeah, it needed using. That car more than any other was desperately in need of just being driven. And I lent it to you quite a lot, Adam. If I was away for a weekend or something, you'd have it to play with.
Oh yeah.
And I still remember it's the only car of the ones who've done that with, where your wife has come running out the house in her dressing gown when I've pulled up outside and yelled across, "Please stop lending it to him." Based off of the amount you were spending on commuting in it.
It's got a bit well, it was quite pricey at the beginning when it was a bit clogged up.
I think when it was driven carefully, when later on when it had settled down a bit, it was doing it nearly 20 miles to the gallon.
Yeah, much more acceptable. I mean, when I mentioned that particular vehicle before in previous episodes, when I said I got it down to 7 mpg.
It had obviously the gearbox had a sport mode, which gave you longer periods between changes. It would hold the revs more, but also found that if you push the accelerator pedal would go down so far and hit a stopper. But it turned out that was I think a button of some sort that would give you an extra. You get
Would give a kick
get a
down,
bit of
wouldn't it?
extra kick. Yeah, I don't know how that worked. I can't remember. It's been too long since I've driven it. I might have even imagined it, but it was sort of like it could be driven quite aggressively. But yes, the fuel it would consume driving like that was terrifying. But it was such a wonderful thing to drive.
I miss that car.
Case in point, I say my parents have never been particularly interested in cars as per se, and especially old cars. They've got no time. As a lot of people, no time for old cars that need attention and fuss and hassle. Just not interested. And so all the old crates I've had all the years, they've never been remotely interested. They didn't complain about being taken to the pub and dropped outside in the Jag.
No.
Even though, if you looked closely at it, one of the reasons it was cheap was the old boy hadn't half met posts. The bumpers were all sorts of interesting shapes, and he had a loose car cover over it, which, flapping around in the wind, had sanded all the paint off the bonnet and the roof.
Fatal. Yeah, that is fatal. Yeah.
I remember I pulled up outside work one day to. And I had taken that one. I hadn't thought about it, but I pulled up outside the office just as everyone was leaving to take a couple of boxes in. And one of the guys walked out and was like, "Car, look at Phil's car." And they all sort of looking at it, and one of them went, "What the hell's happened to the paint?" I was like, yes.
It's fine.
It was terrible.
It's perfectly normal.
Yeah.
Yes. It was a glorious thing. It was a glorious thing. Definitely.
Of all the cars I've had, that is the only one that if I were offered it back, I wouldn't even ask what they wanted for it. I'd have it back.
You'd have it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely gorgeous.
And I enjoyed the fact that it was ropey.
Yes.
And that it was a pretty unique spec. Yeah. But yeah, no, I missed that one. But in the end, I sold it because it was draining me dry, and it was just constant issues.
Just couldn't afford to keep it anymore.
No, it was because, as I could do basic servicing and all that sort of thing, but again, I couldn't do a lot of work on it because it was parked in the road on a steep hill, so it had to go to the garage for a lot. I was busy at the time working with you, Mike, and I didn't have time to be working on it at weekends, so it just kept throwing up issues. And in fairness to it, it was old and it hadn't been used for years, but it never failed to start. It always ran and drove, but there was always warning light roulette going on.
Yeah, there was always something. Yeah,
or and even things like the central locking would go on strike.
Oh, the amount of times it did that to me, it's just I'll just leave it unlocked then, bollocks.
Yes, the attitude I took in the end was, well, screw, if you want to be stolen, then fine. I more or less having an argument with it in the street. It's like, is this what you want?
Someone will nick you.
Yeah. If you don't cooperate.
Yeah, so I realised at some point in the long distance pass it had come equipped with remote central locking, which the fob was long gone, as they usually were. And it occurred to me at one point, I thought, because the locks were playing, I thought it'd be quite good to get that working again. I did a bit of research, and someone on the forum had said, you can't get the Jag fobs anymore. They are well out of production, and they weren't very good when they were new. But
don't exist.
Allegedly, a Nissan one works on the same frequency. Okay. And I thought, you could pick those up, this particular Nissan type, so cheap. And I thought, I'll have a go.
Worth a go.
And I bought one and started fiddling with it. And I suddenly thought, this is not something I want to be getting into. I started looking at fuses, and has it been deactivated, and rummaging up behind the dash. I thought, this is a massive, don't just walk
You're
away.
You're going to make this worse.
It would for weeks it would refuse to lock, or it would lock one door but not the others, or it would unlock one door after all the others had locked. And then when you started to try and fix it, it would behave perfectly.
You would have got to the point there where he either wouldn't lock at all, or worse, would never unlock.
Yes. So again, I think it was all stuff they're well known for, but it had a lot of character.
In buckets. Yeah, absolutely. That was a gorgeous.
And I never even advertised that for sale. Someone who knew I had it.
One of those,
someone I knew offered me a decent price for it, and I knew he'd look after it. And it's still around. It is still around. Yes, I looked it up, and it's still MOT'd and taxed. And I saw it for sale once, Completely by coincidence, I spotted the ad for it online, I think on Gumtree or Car and Classic, something like that. And I messaged the guy. It was an old advert, and I missed it by 2 weeks.
And you would have bought it back.
I would seriously have considered it. I can't remember what he was asking. I don't think it was outrageous.
Right.
The problem was it had lost the wheels. It had standard, much more normal, common Jag XJ wheels on it.
Boring.
Yeah, that's a shame, especially as
Plus,
those
I
wheels
thought,
were
damn, I
original.
put new tyres on those.
Yes.
That was a few years back, but
they'll still be out there somewhere, just on a different Jag, I expect.
Yeah, well, you'd that's it. And I said to the guy, look, I said, could you, if you still got contact with the buyer, could you pass my details on? He said he would.
Right.
But obviously, I have no idea whether he did. So it's always possible that one day my phone will ring.
And it may return. Very good.
Well, yeah,
lovely.
It's the only. I'm not interested in having another one because it wouldn't be that one. And the logical replacement for that was a Ford Puma, so that's what I did.
Of course.
Oh no, that was a good car too.
1.7.
Yeah.
A chap I knew a little bit up country happened to live quite close to the dealer that was selling it on eBay. And again, this was when you could pick up a tidy Puma for 400 or 500 quid.
Not anymore.
No, that's it. They're still cheap, but not that cheap.
Not that cheap.
And it had a little bit of grot around the rear arches, as they always did, but nothing major. And it was a decent mileage, decent service history, all the rest. And he picked it up for me, and I said to him, look, in return, I said, make full use of it for the week. You're covered on the insurance now. It's MOT'd, I've taxed it, etc. And until I can come and get it off you. And he did not make use of it. he had a wonderful time. He normally drove much bigger, sort of old luxury cars. That was his thing. Was up big old Citroens and that, and he absolutely loved it. But I remember the drive home in that; it was just fantastic. I loved that car. Yeah. I had, in fact, Mike, you because I was working with you at the time. On the way home, I got called to go to a client. It was my day off, but whatever, who'd had this new ransomware that had come out, and it was a hotel down in down in Linton.
Oh yeah.
And I think one of the reasons I acquiesced quite rapidly to that, apart from that, all right, they need to be helped out, and the one guy there on his own was struggling to deal with it all. And I thought, well, that means I get to take the road from Blackmore Gate down to Lynmouth in it. Oh, that was amazing.
You took the call just so you could do the drive.
Yeah, that was amazing, that car. And again, never really had any issues with it up until the end. But it was rotting from the inside out.
Yeah.
They do, don't they?
There was a little scab on the sill just inside the driver's door that disappeared under the rubber, and I made the mistake of pulling up the rubber seal one day.
Oh, no.
Tit.
Yeah.
Right, we'll put that back then, because an awful lot of fresh air is under there.
Yes.
And then
tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, the rust started to creep in. It needed new tires, and again, I was, I'd say, broke at the time, but I didn't have money to throw at the car.
Well, as you said, you were working with me, weren't you? So
well, exactly. Working on a shoestring. But it was a hobby car, because my everyday was the ever reliable diesel Skoda Octavia that I'd picked up.
There we go. Another very unlucky car.
No,
that invisible car.
That was invisible.
Fucking car.
But honestly, though, I think I paid £350 for that car, and me and the other engineer did a ton of miles in it, and it asked nothing. It needed almost nothing. It was fantastic. But that was the daily driver, and the Puma was a toy, really. And then Adam will recall we went down to, was it Haynes? I think it was Haynes Museum. Who had a freshly, beautifully resurfaced car park. It was. I think they'd had a big refurb, hadn't they, and an extension.
Yeah,
that's right. They redid the whole place. Yeah.
Yes, and as I recall, Adam, you were driving. You drove down, I drove back.
That's right.
And as you pulled into the car park, I thought, that steering doesn't sound right.
Not at all.
Groaning, and I think it was vibrating, and something's clearly wrong. We parked up in a space. I got out and then I looked behind the car, what had happened was a power steering pipe had rotted through and burst, and we had left a huge snail trail of power steering fluid all down the road. You could see where we'd come in and all across this beautifully resurfaced car park.
Brand new tarmac.
Was
And
not
it
good.
it wasn't like you could pretend it wasn't my car, because obviously it
led
ended
right to
my
it.
car.
Yes.
And what followed then was, when we'd finished and drove home, was stopping every 20 miles to put more fluid in it, because it was fairly pouring. Well, not pouring out, and the thing was, it was in a straight line. It didn't leak. It was fine, but any time you got to a corner and turned the steering, the pressure change would cause it to spray
There
fluid
are
out. So,
quite a lot of corners between here and Sparkford. Yeah.
we were all, on the motorway and up the link road was fine, but yes,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the country roads, yes.
Yes.
And the trouble was, every time you topped it up, of course, it was full of air, so you had to do lot to bleed it, which was a bit of a perpetual motion machine, really.
Quite a long journey home then.
Yeah, it did all right, but at
It
that
was
point I
fine.
sold that one because the MOT was throwing up a few issues. But again, I kind of regret selling that one. If I'd had somewhere to
Yeah.
put it to one side until I could afford to mend it, I'd have kept
To
it.
fix
'Cause
it. Yeah.
even though the sill was rotted, it had scabby arches. Otherwise, it was fine. And the guys did fix it, and I saw it round town quite a few times, looking filthy and neglected, and I felt a bit sorry for it. And I think it just got run into
That's
the
a
ground.
shame.
I don't think it's
Yeah,
around.
that's a shame.
Yeah, I
and
missed
it was
that car as
around.
well.
Yeah, and then I got into Rovers in a big way again, as you
What was
would
after that?
Well, you should remember, because you helped me rescue it. It was
Oh,
a mutual
God.
friend of ours. His son had dumped his car at the garage after they had not fixed it properly, and it sat there for 2 years. And in the end, he asked me if I wanted it for free. It was a 1.4 litre Rover 45. By my standards, a new car, 2004.
Absolutely.
Yes,
It
it had,
was.
unsurprisingly for a K series, it had its head gasket done.
Oh, really? That's
Yes,
rare.
yeah, the head gasket had blown. I mean, he was a car killer, that lad. Every car he had, he destroyed. But in theory, I thought, well, this could be a good option, because it had done 0 miles on the new head gasket. It was very low mileage. It looked grotty, and I don't particularly like the 45, but I thought it's got to be worth a go for free. But he
Yeah.
said the reason it got dumped at the garage was they started it up after the head gasket, and there was a rattle from the engine. And
Okay.
they phoned him up and said, "Look, I know you spent all this money, but there's something else wrong." And he went, "Screw it, not worth it." And it just sat in their yard for 2 years. And
Wow.
when I did get it started, I think when they said rattle, what they meant was it's knocking its tits off. It was, I mean, it took us quite a lot of effort to start it.
Oh,
In
God, it
retrospect,
did.
the battery was knackered and we jumped it off the Octavia, but it would really struggled to start when it was cold. And it's what I think, and in the end, we got it going and topped up the fluids and cleaned some of the green scunge off it to drive it down for an MOT.
Scunge.
It was
It's a
quite a
technical
scunge.
term.
Well, enough that it didn't look like it had conjunctivitis, and that
Nice
the police
scunge.
wouldn't pull you over, scrape all the leaves out the scuttle panel, and check that it was roadworthy. It had good tyres on it and everything, and I drove it a few miles down the road to the garage, and I found with the knocking, if you turn the radio up loud enough, you couldn't hear it. But
How many problems could you fix like that?
Well, the road between where it had been parked up and where the garage was hilly, and that did show there's definitely a performance issue.
God,
I've driven 1.4s before, and they're quite revvy and quite, for a little engine, they're not bad. Those K series are actually really good engines.
Yeah.
They're just rather prone. This one definitely had issues. I thought it feels like it's got no power. And it turned out basically that one of the camshafts on the top of the engine was seized. I have no idea how it happened or what on earth happened, but that was one where my mechanic said, "Don't even bother."
It's just not worth it. Yeah.
Especially when I saw what the state the interior was in. I was
Oh,
already,
More
He had-
scunge in there, was
Well,
there?
he hadn't cleaned the food and rubbish out of it from the last time he'd used it.
Oh,
2 years of dying sandwiches, wasn't it?
It
grotty
was
little man.
vile. And it needed other little odds and ends, but the trouble is, again, at the time, and I don't think they're worth much more now, if I'd cleaned it up and done everything it needed for an MOT and sold it, it would have been worth probably 300 quid.
Yeah.
And it's just
No,
not
they're
worth
not.
it.
They're not worth a lot. People
But
just
it
don't
got
seem to want
parted
them.
out, and it is, to this day, I think, one of the only cars I've ever scrapped.
Okay.
I can't think of any others I've scrapped
Nothing leaps
myself.
to mind.
And I
Okay.
got to watch it being munched up by the grabber and dumped on the back of the truck by the trainee, as it turned out, who made a bit of a mess of it. So it was kind of like there was a car he put it on top of on the back of the lorry, and he kept on getting it wrong. So it was kind of like, I felt you'd almost feel sorry for it. It was sort of being mashed up and down and up and down and up and down on top of the car that it was going on top of until he got it in the right place.
Oh dear.
But it
What an
donated
ending.
a lot of parts to other cars, so it
Well,
lives on.
fair enough. Bits of it do. Yeah.
And then I made a really big mistake, and a friend of mine was selling, a huge car collector, was selling another 1.4K series Rover, a
Right.
bright yellow MG ZR,
Oh yes, we're all familiar
which
with that
Adam
one.
is
Yes.
familiar with,
Yes,
bit.
he is.
because it was a steaming turd of a car.
Whoa, steady.
I don't know. That was one of those cars. The moment I picked it up, I thought, I don't like this car at all. I thought it'd be great fun. It's bright coloured and it's good fun, and mechanically it was very, very good, and it drove exactly the way they should. But it had led a brutal previous life, and there was so much broken glass hidden in the crevices and corners.
A lot.
Yes, I'd
Not
forgotten
a
about
single panel was the same shade of yellow.
that. Yeah.
I think it had been well looked after mechanically, but bodywork wise, it was awful.
Mm.
And the build quality was appalling. So I never liked it. And then Adam's wife said, "Well, I like it. I'll have that." And the agreement was, I think, as I recall, it needed a coolant change because it was a bit. It only had water.
It was just water, yeah.
Which, being K series, we thought, let's be careful.
Yeah.
So we did a coolant flush on your driveway, and I did all that, and we cleaned it up and glued a few bits of interior trim back on, and all was good. And then I can't remember. We were going to take it for a test drive to make sure it all was good, and it wouldn't start. And in the end, it got taken away on the back of a tow truck. And I thought, well, that's the end of that sale then.
Yes.
And it got taken down to my usual mechanic. It was a Sunday, so it just got dumped in his yard.
Mm.
At the week, no, it was at the weekend, and then the next day, I recall thinking, I think this is ridiculous. It turned over fine, it just wouldn't fire, and it was fine a couple of hours ago.
Mm.
And I did a bit of research, and I went down there and thought, what about fuel pump relay? Because we couldn't hear the fuel pump running, and we thought the fuel pump had packed up.
Mm.
And I swapped the relay with, I think, the heated rear window, and it fired up. Thought, happy days. That's all it is.
It's just a relay.
And as a joke, I sent Adam a picture of the rev counter to show him it was running. Said, "Still want it?" And he came back going, "Yeah, all right then."
Oh, dear.
Well, it's fine.
Discerning individual.
What followed was 2 years of phone calls from Adam going, "I'm stuck in the car park. Can you come and rescue me?"
Yeah.
Because
Whoa.
the motor wire had fallen off, the alarm had gone berserk, the battery terminal had fallen off.
Steady. I called you once because I was freezing
Yeah,
my
but-
tits off at Christmas in Sainsbury's car
There were
park.
more than one time.
The
There
number
was
I
of
asked
more
for-
than
times-
one time you
I
called
asked for a hand a few times, but that was the only time I was actually broken down.
The number of by this stage, Adam and I were sharing an office. The number of times you would say to me, "Do you mind just hanging back and following me back? Because I'm not sure it's gonna make it."
Yeah, there were
So
some.
I was behind him when he conked out.
But it never did conk out though.
No, it never did. That I was never needed as a backup. But you did on more than one occasion. You said,
Yeah.
"Would you mind just following me back, just in
Yes.
case?"
I did. It did have a moment with its ABS, combined with some tyres that were very near the legal limit, where it was a slightly greasy road and the traffic stopped abruptly. And oh my God, I applied the brakes. Honestly, it was like being on ice, and just the poo that came out.
It had terrible brakes. They were absolutely fine as terms of they were, it had good discs and pads, but the 25 and ZR brakes were not good.
No, and the fact that the ABS was iffy. When I stamped on them because I needed to stop, it went, I don't have ABS now. Oh, good God.
What I think the thing I really disliked about it was just hugely disappointing, because I was a big fan of the older generation of Rover 200, the Honda Concerto shape.
Yeah.
It felt robust and solid. I liked the look of it. It was a nicely engineered car. And they were lovely to drive. I've always been a big fan of them, and I thought, well, this is this is the replacement. This shape
is the progression of that. Yeah,
and It honestly, it felt.
just wasn't.
I mean, it felt so cheap and shoddy.
Well, they were by that stage, though, weren't they? That was the problem.
Comically bad. The build quality was just appalling, and it really sort of just pissed me off. And I don't think it helped
that stage where they were just building crap, weren't they?
And you could tell they were trying to cut corners, but the quality was nowhere near what it had been. And I think what annoyed me with that one as well was it was this big, shouty, leery spoilers and side skirts. It was bright yellow. It was, look at me, I've got a little 1.4 engine though. But it did have a grotty fart cannon on the back as well, which again is not my cup of tea.
Oh, Kaylee loved that.
And actually did when I was at a mate. I went round to see a mate, and then I started it up outside his house to drive home at about 10 o'clock at night. And then he sort of came out to say something just before I left. So I wound down the window, and we ended up having a little chat for 5 minutes. His neighbour came out to the house to complain that I'd woken his kids up. It's sitting there going, which I just got so used to it, I'd forgotten.
It was a very subtle car.
No. I believe what killed it in the end, it was a variety of things, wasn't it? Because it had been parked up for a while and it just sort of disintegrated, I think.
There was a bit of disintegration. A head gasket went, obviously.
There was more than one occasion I came out
never
to the
did prove that.
You were pouring fluids into it.
Well, you say never did prove it. That it constantly needed the coolant topping up, but it wasn't coming out. And then it developed all of the white gunk in the filler cap.
Right, because I think when I first looked at it with you, it wasn't doing that, was it? But we couldn't work out. It did have a leak at one point, but that got fixed, and the inlet manifold.
Yeah.
Which is a very common thing on those, but
which is fine. I mean, but it was a case of fix the inlet manifold, and then it went head gasket gone.
For one of those, it did have quite a lot of miles on it, which is possibly part of the reason it had so little of the interior trim left attached.
Yeah, it was over 100,000. It was fair play to it.
120, I think, on it, which isn't a lot, but I think for one of those is actually
one of those. Yeah,
a lot. But never liked it. I'm not sad it's gone.
I think we're going to pause things there. As you can probably tell already, Phil's car history is large and varied. Join us again next week for the remainder of Phil's cars. Don't worry, there are more Rovers. Be sure to check out Stuff and Waffle on Twitter and Instagram, and feel free to email stuffandwaffle@gmail.com.